الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. We continue on with the series on the etiquettes and rulings of dua, and this is going to be inshallah the second to last session. So next week will be our last session. All right, next week will be the very last session for this series. Before we start on what's new for today, let's do some review. So we completed the category of those whose du'as are answered due to a quality that's within them. And anybody who can recall some of the things we mentioned from last week? Huh? Yeah, the one in distress, yeah. They're on the screen. The one, okay. Was that last week or the one week before? I think that was the week before. Good, right? The one who makes dua in times of ease. Anything else? The just ruler, yeah. Good. Dua for the believer in absence. Just ruler, he just said that. Good. So that was when we got to the places. Yeah. So we also started places or times. Right? Times. The one who prays a lot of nawafil. Right? What are some of the times du'as that are accepted due to the time it's when it's made? Good. Dua between adhan and iqama. Sahar, which is the last part of the night. When it rains. Traveling, okay. Wudu at night. The special time on Friday. All right. When is that time? There's different views, right? We had mentioned several different views. One of the strongest views is when the khatib sits until the Salatul Jummah is finished, right? And there was a hadith on that. There's another view that says it's the last part of the day, right after Salatul Asr, or right before Salatul Maghrib. From the start, yeah. All right. Sujood, right? We said sujood as well. All right. So we have the one in distress, the one who makes dua in times of ease, dua in the gathering. Dua for a fellow believer in absence, the just ruler, the one who performs a lot of nawafil, one who's dutiful to their parents. Yeah, but we had covered that, I think, the previous week. Yeah. Wudu before going to bed or waking up at night. All right, praying in extreme cold. All right, then we talked about the accepted dua due to time of supplication between the adhan and the iqama. Last part of the night. Special time on Friday. Oh, the last part of the night. Right, that's including the last part of the night. Sujood in the battlefield. All right, Laylatul Qadr, who saved that day of Arafah. In the presence of a dying person. All right, at the crowing of the rooster. All right, why at the crowing of the rooster? Because the presence of the angels, hoping that the angels will say Ameen. Right, and during rainfall. And that was the last thing we covered. And then we had stopped at the topic of the 15th night of Sha'ban. And we had delayed it until this week. I do apologize because I thought that tonight would have been the 15th. But when you look back, it was actually last night. Last night was the 15th night of Sha'ban. In any case, this is a topic that we should be familiar with. It's going to come back again every year. So there's a lot of things said about the 15th night of Sha'ban, which just passed, right? That was last night. From people doing certain actions on this night to others saying that it is an innovation and something that was not around during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So just to shed some light and very quickly summarize, the issue of the 15th night of Sha'ban, there are numerous hadiths from about 12 companions that have been narrated concerning the virtue of this night, right? So there are narrations concerning the virtue of this night. What's the problem though? The problem is that many of these narrations are weak. Many of these narrations are weak. According to some of the scholars, all of them are weak. And there are some scholars who authenticate some of them. So no doubt there are some that are weak, there are some that are fabricated, and there may be a few that are authentic, and there are some scholars who did authenticate them. All right, but most of what has been narrated are weak hadith. But there are some that may be authentic, and there are some scholars of hadith who have authenticated these hadith. So based on that, the fact that there are a number of narrations about the virtue of this night, there does seem to be some sort of indication that there is some special virtue to the night, right? There is, because of the sheer quantity of narrations and hadith about this night, there does seem to be some basis for saying that there is something to the night. Now, it's not to the level of Laylatul Qadr, but there does seem to be some indication that there is something about this night. And for this reason, majority of the scholars, and this is the position of the four madhahib, this is the official position of the four madhahib, is that this is actually a virtuous night. This is the position of the four madhahib, and we'll mention some quotes for some scholars of the four madhahib. Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, says, it has reached us that it is said that prayers and du'as are answered on 5 nights. And then he mentions 5 nights. The night of Jum'ah, the night of Adha, and the night of Fitr, the 2 Eids, the first night of Rajab, and then the night of the middle of Sha'ban. All right, so this is coming from Imam Shafi'i. He says it has reached us. Where is this coming from? Obviously, he's not taking from the Torah or the Injil. Imam Shafi'i, he's taking from his teachers, right? And he died in 204 after Hijrah. So he's a very early scholar. And he's saying that this has reached us, meaning from our teachers and those who we studied with and we took knowledge from. It has reached us that dua is answered on these 5 nights. And amongst those nights he mentions is the night of the middle of Sha'ban. And then he says, I consider it mustahab, it's recommended, to do all that has been narrated concerning these nights. So the 5 nights he mentioned, the night of Jum'ah, the night of Adha, Fitr, the first night of Rajab, and then the night of the middle of Sha'ban. He says that I consider it mustahab to do all that has been narrated concerning these nights with extra ibadah, extra worship, without it being regarded as an obligation. All right, so this is a quote from Imam Shafi'i, who says that it has reached him from his teachers and those he took from, that these nights have some sort of virtue, and that du'as and prayers and du'as are answered on these 5 nights. All right, then we have a statement as well from Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is known to be very strict when it comes to innovations and not accepting things at face value. But even he says, so many ahadith and reports exist regarding the excellence of the 15th night of Sha'ban that one is compelled to accept that this night does possess some virtue. All right, so Imam Ibn Taymiyyah says that there are so many ahadith and so many narrations about this night that even though there's a lot of these narrations are weak and not reliable, but because of the sheer quantity of narrations, one is compelled to accept that this night does possess some virtue. And then he mentions that there are scholars, past and present, who have rejected the virtue of this night. And this is a fact, that there are scholars from the very beginning, the early generations, and the later generations who did reject the virtue of this night. And they said that there's nothing virtuous about this night. But he says, after mentioning that, he says, however, that which many of the people of knowledge, or the majority of them, so he ascribes this view to the majority of the people of knowledge. That which many of the people of knowledge, or the majority of them, are upon from amongst our ashab, meaning the scholars of the Hanbali madhab, and other than them from the other madhahib, is the virtue of this night. And he says, an explicit statement of Imam Ahmad demonstrates this, due to the great number of hadith transmitted regarding it, and due to that which confirms this from the words indeed transmitted from the Salaf, the pious predecessors. Some of its merits have been narrated in the Musnads and Sunan. These are categories of hadith compilations, even though other things may have been fabricated regarding it. So he says, yes, there are things that have been fabricated. There are a lot of weak hadith that are not reliable. However, there's a large quantity of narrations, and he ascribes this view to the majority of scholars that they do hold this night to be virtuous, including amongst them Imam Ahmad. All right, so what are some of the hadith that mention the virtue of this night? This one is probably the most authentic one out of all the narrations that have been mentioned, in which Rasulullah is reported to have said, Allah looks on the night of the half of Sha'ban, and He forgives, so He forgives the entirety of His creation, except for a polytheist or a person with enmity, mushrik or a mushahin. All right, so this hadith has been authenticated by a number of scholars. There are some scholars who weakened it, and there are a number of scholars who authenticated it. And this is probably the strongest hadith to indicate that this night does have some virtue. All right, we'll mention some quotes from some of the scholars of various madhahib. Imam Ibn Nujaym al-Hanafi, he says, amongst the mandubat, the recommended acts, is to stay up the last 10 nights of Ramadan, the night of the 2 Eids, the 10 nights of the Hijjah, and the night of the middle of Sha'ban, as is transmitted in the hadith and mentioned in detail in the Targhib and Tarhib. What is meant by staying up the night is apparently the whole night, and what could be, or it could be most of it. All right, so this is a quote from one of the authorities in the Hanafi madhab to say that this is a night that has virtue, and it is recommended to spend it in worship. Imam Ibn al-Hajj al-Maliki says the Salaf, these early generations, the Salaf are the early generations, would sanctify this night and prepare themselves for it in advance. All right, so there are a number of scholars from the Salaf, from the early generation, who did hold that this night is virtuous, and some did reject it as well. As we said, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions that there are some early and later generation scholars who accepted it, and some did reject it. So this is from Imam Ibn al-Hajj al-Maliki, from the authorities of the Maliki madhab. Imam al-Khatib al-Sharbini al-Shafi'i says, prayers and dua in them, referring to the night of the 2 Eids, and in the night of Jum'ah, and the first of Rajab, and the middle of Sha'ban are answered. So it is mustahab, as mentioned in the Rawdah of Imam al-Nawawi. It's authority of the scholar of authority from the Shafi'i madhab. And then Imam al-Buhuti al-Hanbali, from the authorities of the Hanbali madhab, he says, standing up for the night in prayer is sunnah. Its beginning being with 2 rak'ahs of light recitation. He's talking about just general sunnah now. And its timing being from the evening to the beginning of dawn. And one should not stand for the whole night except for the night of Eid, and one should pay special attention to the night of the 15th of Sha'ban. So we have here quotes from scholars from various madhahib, and we quoted Imam Shafi'i earlier as mentioned, it has reached him that dua and prayers are accepted on this night, and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioning that this is the position of majority of scholars. So it does seem that this night does have some sort of virtue. Obviously, there are a lot of things that have been exaggerated regarding it, but to say that it is just like any other night, a person can have that view, but to call it an innovation is going very far, especially when you have a number of scholars, and we can say perhaps the majority of scholars, past and present, who do hold that this is a virtuous night. Imam Ibn Salah, he says, the middle night of Sha'ban does have merit. To spend its nights in active worship is recommended, mustahab, but on an individual basis, not collectively. All right, so while many scholars do hold that this night has virtue, they say though that worship should be individual, and it should not be taken as something to gather together in masajid and offer prayers together, as he says here, and we'll put a few more quotes after that. We'll mention after. Guidelines for worship on the 15th night of Sha'ban. So if somebody does believe that this night is virtuous and du'as are answered on this night, all right, you follow the view that those scholars who say that it is a virtuous night and du'a is answered on this night and extra ibadat is recommended, then there are some guidelines for this. Number one, worship should be done individually. If you are going to be worshiping on this night, it should be done individually, not collectively. And we find that the jurists have stated the dislike of gathering for the purpose of worship on this night. All right, so those who say, yes, you do extra worship, they don't recommend that you gather together and do that worship together. And the second thing, it is not permissible to assign a specific way of praying on this night, such as specifying a certain amount of raka'at or specific surahs that must be read. So one thing that did develop over time is that a special prayer was developed. And I think it was like 100 raka'ats, and they said you have to recite this and this surah. And so this is something that scholars spoke about, and they said that this should not be done. Assigning a specific type of salah, this amount of raka'at, this specific surahs that has to be read, then this would be considered a type of innovation. So if a person does follow the view that it is a virtuous night and you want to do extra ibadah on this night, you may do so, but it should be individually done, and you should not invent a specific way of praying and worshipping other than what we have evidence for. Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, he says concerning Salah Laylat al-Nisf min Sha'ban, a specific prayer that they used to pray. They used to gather together in the Masjid and they used to pray this specific Salah called Salatul Laylat al-Nisf min Sha'ban. And also he talks about something called Salatul Ragha'ib. Anybody knows what is Salatul Ragha'ib? Or heard that before? So this is a Salah that they also, they used to pray, people used to pray on the first night of Rajab. Right? We mentioned a few quotes about the virtue of the first night of Rajab. So people, they started to gather and pray on the 15th night of Sha'ban together, and they started to gather and pray on the first night of Rajab together. So Imam al-Nawawi says that these two salahs, even though he does hold that it's a virtuous night and worship is recommended, he says that these two particular salah, hatan salatan bid'atan mawdu'atan munkaratan qabihatan. He says these two salahs are invented, blameworthy, ugly innovations. All right, so if you are going to worship on this night, it should not be done collectively, it should not be done together, it should be on your own individually in your house. Imam al-Subki, he has something similar. He says, gathering al-ijtima'u li salati laylat al-nisfi min Sha'ban wa li salati al-ragha'ib bid'ah madhmuma. Gathering for the 15th night of Sha'ban prayer and the ragha'ib prayer is as a blameworthy innovation. Okay, so we have to distinguish between saying that the night has virtue and whoever wants to offer extra ibadat on this night may do so, versus making it into a big grand event and people are gathering together and you're making up a different type of salah and praying a certain amount of rak'at and then reciting this and this surah, then that's a different issue, and the scholars have spoken about that and they have more or less condemned that. Right? But what is permissible is to hold that the night has virtue and spend it in worship and extra ibadat and dhikr and dua and so on. And this, as we mentioned the quotes of various scholars from different madhahib, past and present, who have accepted the virtue of this night. So this is in summary the issue of the 15th night of Sha'ban. It has passed already, but you can bear this in mind for next year, inshallah, if Allah gives us life. Any questions on that? Any questions? Okay. Question? Okay. All right. That ends the topic on dua that is accepted due to time. Now we're going to go to, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened, is that people exaggerated and innovations did happen and fabrication, hadith were fabricated. And so people overreacted, and then they denied that this night has no virtue whatsoever and it's completely made up. So we can say maybe possibly that the truth is somewhere in between. And if somebody does believe, and as we said, there are scholars past and present who did deny that there is any virtue to this night, and they believe all the hadith were weak. So if you do follow that view, that's okay. That's okay as well. And if you follow the view that there is some virtue in this night and you want to make extra ibadat, then this is fine as well. And this is within the scope of valid difference of opinion. All right, inshallah. Good. So the question is, if we do accept that the night has virtue, why are we restricting the form of worship to individual? Because when you make it into a collective act of worship, then it gives the impression that this is one of the sha'air of the religion. This is like one of the symbols of the religion, like Jum'ah, right? Or gathering together for something like Taraweeh or Eid, right? Where you have sanctioned gatherings, where it becomes a symbol of the religion. So if we don't have the evidences to indicate that, then if you gather together, then it becomes like something that has been legislated in the religion, versus a person doing it on their own. I want to worship on my own, however much I'm able to. But when you give it an organized form, right? This has to be this amount of rak'at, and you read this surahs, and you do this, and you gather this time. Now you're making it into something that resembles the formal gatherings that have been sanctioned in the Sharia, like the Jum'ah and the Eid and so on. So this is the reason why they restricted it to individual worship, and also because we don't have any evidence that the Prophet ﷺ or the companions or any of the generation that came directly after, that they gathered together in the masajid and worship like that together, collectively. So that would be another reason.
What if your household also that would have to be on an individual basis, husband by himself, wife by herself?
What do you mean, like praying together?
Yeah.
Yeah, you should avoid that.
So
I mean, you can pray together in the same room, no problem, right? You don't have to be away from each other. You can make dua in the same area, but to make it into a collective act of worship, then this should be avoided according to the view of the scholars that we mentioned. Allah knows best. Yeah, right. Yeah, and this is what we just mentioned too. That there's no, even though there are hadith that seem to indicate that the night has virtue, we don't have anything to say that they actually gathered together and did that collectively. Individually. Well, there are to go back to the narrations about the dua being answered and so on this night. So there are narrations that mention dua answered and extra worship and so on, but they don't mention it being done together, collectively.
So could we assume the use of that night?
Yeah, this is the assumption that it was done on an individual basis. This is the assumption that's given. All right, last question, and we want to move on, inshallah. Right. Yeah. So there's the general recommendation that this night has virtue, and that you should do some extra acts of worship without it being mandatory. As Imam Shafi'i says here, I consider mustahab to do all that has been narrated concerning these nights without it being regarded as an obligation. All right. So now we move on to the issue of or the category of accepted dua due to place of supplication. ما يرجع إلى الأماكن التي يستجاب فيها الدعاء. Right? What are places in which dua is accepted? Everything we're going to mention here are places in the Holy Land, specifically in Mecca. Right? Everything we're going to mention here is places in Mecca. And there is a letter that Al-Hasan al-Basri, this is one of the tabi'een, the generation after the Sahaba, he wrote a letter to the people of Mecca, informing them that there are 15 places in the vicinity of Haram Sharif where du'as are accepted. And then he mentioned those 15 during Tawaf, at the Multazam, this is the Hijr of Ismail. This is that semicircle area, it's called Hijr Ismail or Multazam. Under Mizab al-Rahma, this is the water sprout in the Hatim where the rain water drops off from the roof of the Kaaba. Inside of the Kaaba Sharif at the well of Zamzam, on Safa and Marwa, while walking between Safa and Marwa, at Maqam Ibrahim on the plain of Arafah, at Muzdalifah at Mina, 13, 14, 15, at the time of pelting the 3 shayateen in Mina. All right, so he mentions these. The scholars have accepted all of these places, with the exception of the big Jamrah. They say that this particular one, there's no narration that Rasulullah specifically made dua on this one. This is the one that's pelted on the 10th day of the Hijjah, on the Yawm al-Nahr. There's no narration that he made dua after pelting this one, the big one. But there are narrations that on the Ayam al-Tashriq that he would, after he pelted the other Jamarat, he would make the dua. So the scholars have largely accepted this letter that Imam al-Hasan al-Basri wrote. And they all have evidences. We're not going to go into all the evidences to conserve some time. But as you can see here, they're all in the Mecca area. And so this is why, when you are making Hajj, and to a lesser extent Umrah, you're essentially like in a gold mine for dua. Right? Everywhere you go is places where dua is accepted. So these are 15 places. Now we don't really have any other evidence to say that dua is accepted elsewhere. All right? So we don't have evidence saying that dua is accepted, for example, in Medina or Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis. Even though we might assume, right, or by analogy, that these places are holy places as well, that dua would be answered. But as far as I know, we don't have any evidence to say that dua is accepted in these places. Yeah. So the hadith says we can interpolate from the hadith that it is a rawda min riyad al-jannah, that it is a blessed spot, and so you can make that assumption. But the hadith specifically saying that dua is answered in this place, there's no narrations on that. But we can, you can interpret from that that the Rawda or Medina or the Prophet's Masjid or Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, Masjid al-Aqsa, we can, you can make that, that argument based on the fact that these are holy places, but there's no explicit narrations regarding that. Right, in addition to these 15 places, we can also say Mecca itself. So you have all these places in Mecca, and then you can say also Mecca itself is a place, the borders of Mecca itself is a place where dua is accepted. And this is based on a long hadith. We had actually quoted this hadith today in the Jum'ah, where the Prophet made dua against a number of members of Quraysh after they had thrown the intestines of a camel on him while he was prostrating. So when he made this dua against them, the narration mentions that they had a conviction that the prayers and invocations were accepted in the city. This is a statement that's made in the hadith, that people believed that prayers and invocations were accepted in the city. And the Prophet ﷺ knew that this was something people believed, and he never corrected it. So that would mean that he is affirming it, and he affirms that this is the case. So you can make the case as well that not just in the places that were mentioned previously, but Mecca in general, entering into Mecca in general is a place where dua is accepted. And some of the scholars have also mentioned at the site of the Kaaba, when seeing the Kaaba, that dua is accepted. There is a hadith, this hadith is weak though. The doors of the heavens open and dua is answered in 4 places: when the armies meet in battle, when the rain falls, when the salah commences, and when the Kaaba is seen. So this hadith itself is weak, but we've seen some of these come in previous hadiths that were authentic, right? Such as the rain falling, right? We quoted the hadith before. When the armies meet, we saw that as well. So some of these have been mentioned in other hadith, but this particular hadith has some weakness to it. So even though this hadith, it is weak, right? It is weak, but there are other evidences to suggest that the Prophet did used to make dua when he saw the Kaaba. And one of them is the hadith of Muslim, hadith of Abu Hurairah. When he finished the circumambulation, he came to Safa, he ascended it to a height from where he could see the Kaaba. He raised his hands in prayer, and he began to praise Allah and prayed what he wanted to pray. Right, so this is an indication that when Rasulullah saw the Kaaba, he made dua. Imam bin Nawawi says in Kitab al-Adhkar, when one enters Mecca and his gaze falls upon the Kaaba and he reaches the Masjid, it is recommended for him to raise his hands and make dua, due to what has been narrated that dua is answered when seeing the Kaaba. All right, so there are some hadiths. I just said the hadiths are, the one we mentioned is weak, but there are other evidences that might suggest that this is a time when dua is answered. And even if it's not explicitly stated, the hadith of Muslim does indicate that Rasulullah made the dua when he saw the Kaaba. After he had ascended Safa, he made the dua to when he saw the Kaaba. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, the mataf area has been expanded. So before they used to make the tawaf in a much smaller area. Now it's been expanded, and you can make tawaf, in a larger area. Is that included in the times or the places where dua is answered? Allahu a'lam, possibly. Because the hadith that have been mentioned about the tawaf, they talk about the tawaf itself. Not necessarily the where you're walking, but during the tawaf. So wherever you're making tawaf, then this would indicate that as well. When it comes to drinking water of Zamzam, so this was included here, but actually, when it comes to Zamzam, it's not restricted to the well. All right? When we say dua is answered with Zamzam, it's not drinking at the well, but it has to do with the water itself, drinking the water. And the water of Zamzam is the blessed water. And we have the hadith of Muslim in which mentioned the story of Abu Dharr. Abu Dharr, when he traveled to Mecca to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and he wasn't able to meet him for some time, and he stayed for 30 nights, and he didn't have anything to eat. And he was just drinking Zamzam the entire month. No food. He was just drinking Zamzam. And not only did it sustain him, but he actually gained some weight. He says here that I've grown so bulky that there are a pair of wrinkles on my stomach. So it became a bit chunky because he was drinking the water of Zamzam. And he said, I do not feel any hunger. And then Rasulullah said to him that it is blessed. Right? It is a blessed water, and it also serves as food. So this hadith is an indication that Zamzam water is a blessed water. And there is a hadith as well, the hadith of Jabir. I heard the Prophet saying, Ma'u Zamzam lima shuriba lahu. That the water of Zamzam is for whatever it is drunk for. It is whatever it is drunk for. This hadith does have some there is some discussion on the authenticity of it. However, the scholars have said that this is from the things that are mujarrabat. They have been tried and tested. That people have tested making dua with the water of Zamzam. They found that dua is answered when you make dua with the water of Zamzam. So this can be included, not necessarily in the category of places, but in drinking the water itself. Drinking the water itself. All right. Next category is accepted dua due to prestige of dua. So it doesn't. The acceptance of the dua here is not tied to the place. It's not tied to the time. It's not tied to the characteristic of the person, but it has to do with what they're saying. What they're saying, the type of dua they're making, it can affect the answer, whether the dua is answered or not. So one of the things that have come in the hadith is calling on Allah by His greatest name. So this is a term that comes in several hadiths, Ismullah al-A'zam, the greatest name of Allah. So we have the hadith, for example, of Anas ibn Malik, where he says, the Prophet ﷺ heard a man say, "O Allah, I ask you by virtue of the fact that all praise is due to you, none has the right to be worshipped but you alone, and you have no partner or associate, the bestower, the originator of the heavens and the earth, the possessor of majesty and honor." And then he ﷺ said, he has asked Allah by His greatest name, which if he is asked, thereby he gives, and if he is called upon, thereby he answers. So what is the greatest name? Based on this hadith, there are a number of names mentioned here, right? Actually, a number of names mentioned here. So it's not entirely clear from this hadith what is Allah's greatest name. Because we have, of course, Allah is mentioned, the bestower, the originator, fatir, and so on. There's another hadith which is a bit more explicit. Hadith of Abu Umama reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah's most magnificent name, which when used to implore Him, He responds, is found in 3 surah: Al-Baqarah, Ali Imran, and Taha. And when we look back at these 3 surahs, we find that the common name is Al-Hayyul Qayyum. Al-Hayyul Qayyum is found in all 3 of these surahs, in addition, of course, to the name Allah. So there is a long discussion amongst the scholars, what is Allah's greatest name? With the 2 most common views being, it is Allah itself, Allah, or it is Al-Hayyul Qayyum. And other scholars have said that there's no such thing as one greatest name, that they're all great and so on and so forth. There's a long discussion on this. I don't really want to get too much into it, but there's a long discussion on what is Allah's greatest name, but there's conflicting narrations on what it is. Yeah. Yeah, possibly. I didn't look at the full narration. Yeah. Even if it's mentioned there, it's not as explicit as the second hadith. The second one says that it's in these 3 surahs. Good. So the brother mentions that the reason why Ayatul Kursi is the greatest ayah is because it contains Allah's greatest name, which actually is 2 names, because Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum is 2 names. So Allahu A'lam, some of the scholars have said that this issue of Allah's greatest name, it is like the issue of Laylatul Qadr. It's like the issue of the hour on Friday. It is like these issues where we actually don't have explicit or certain knowledge of it. And so you seek out all of Allah's names, and then inshallah you will if you call on Allah by all of His names, then one of them will be Allah's greatest name. And many scholars do believe that Allah itself is the greatest name, and that is Ismullah al-A'zam. Yeah. Why wouldn't Allah teach His greatest name? So they use that to say that that we don't know. Possibly, I never heard of that before. That hadith has been used as evidence to say that Allah has more than 99 names. They use that hadith to say that the hadith talking about the day of judgment, in which Rasulullah will come in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then Allah will inspire him with praises that he never knew before. Right? So Allah will inspire Rasulullah to praise Allah with praises that he never knew before. And so the scholars say that this is an indication that Allah has names and attributes that has not been revealed to us. All right? So maybe they might say that one of them is Allah's greatest name, but then the hadith mentions here that you have the first hadith, the Prophet said, لَقَدْ سَأَلْتَ اللَّهَ بِإِسْمِهِ الْأَعْظَمِ, that you have asked Allah by His greatest name. So the hadith indicate that the person that he came across did ask Allah by His greatest name. So it's a long discussion, but the two most common views is that the greatest name of Allah is either Allah itself or Al-Hayyul Qayyum. Then we have certain special du'as, right? That you make these du'as, and there is a indication that this du'a will be accepted just by using this specific du'a. So we have, for example, the du'a of Yunus. The du'a of Yunus when he was in the belly of the whale. This hadith is in Tirmidhi and Nasa'i, the supplication of Dhunnun. Prophet Yunus, when he supplicated while in the belly of the whale, was La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. And then Rasulullah goes on to say, so indeed no Muslim man supplicates with it for anything ever except Allah responds to him. Alright, so فإنه لم يدعو بها رجل مسلم في شيء قط إلا استجاب الله له. No person makes the dua of Yunus except that Allah will answer and respond to him. We have another hadith here, Musnad of Abi Ya'li says, the Messenger of Allah said, no servant seeks refuge from the fire 7 times in a day, except that the fire says, O my Lord, your servant has sought refuge in you from me, so give him refuge. And no servant asks Allah for paradise 7 times in one day, except that paradise says, O my Lord, your servant asks for paradise, so enter him into paradise. Alright, these are just a few examples, but there might be others of specific du'as in which Rasulullah says that you make this du'a and it will be answered. After that, there are other times, places and situations where du'a may be accepted, but these evidences are disputed. So there's disputed authenticity on these that I've listed here. And so we're not going to mention all the evidences, we'll just mention them in summary. That they all have evidences, but the evidences are disputed in authenticity. So perhaps the hadith is weak or something else similar to that. So what has been mentioned, that dua is accepted after the fard prayers, dua of the sick person, dua of an elder person, dua of the completion of the Quran, night of Jum'ah, night of the 2 Eids, first night of Rajab. We've mentioned some of these before. Dua of a person in financial difficulties, dua after zawal, dua for someone who did something good for you, dua after sneezing. All right, so all these have come. There are some evidences for them, but the evidence is disputed. All right, so the hadith probably is most likely not authentic, and so we can't say for sure these are times where dua is accepted, but it has been narrated. All right, any questions before we move on to the next category? All right, so we have gone over the etiquettes of dua. We mentioned the types of dua that are answered due to characteristic of a person, the person who's making the dua. We mentioned du'as that are answered due to the time in which the dua is made, due to the place in which the dua is made, due to the prestige of the dua. So we completed all that, and now we move on to what has been prohibited in dua. This is also very important. مَا نُهِيَ عَنْهُ مِنَ الدُّعَاءِ. What has been prohibited in dua. All right, so these are the things that you should not be doing. When you make dua, do not do these things. And if you do them, then you are putting your dua at risk of not being answered and possibly being rejected. The first one, number 1 and 2, they come in the same hadith. All right, and this is very important, which is dua for sin and being hasty. All right, dua asking Allah for a sin, commit a sin, or being hasty in expecting the answer of to the dua. So we have the hadith of Abu Hurairah in Sahih Muslim. He says, the supplication of a slave continues to be granted with the condition that as long as he does not supplicate for a sinful thing or for something that would cut off the ties of kinship, and he does not grow impatient. All right, so the supplication will be answered as long as you're not supplicating for something sinful, or you're not supplicating that family ties are cut off, and you're not impatient. And then he was asked after that, it was said, O Messenger of Allah, what does growing impatient mean? What does growing impatient mean? And he said that it is one saying, I supplicated again and again, but I do not think that my prayer will be answered. Right, you made dua and you didn't receive the answer. So what do you say? Allah has not answered my dua. This is grounds for now that dua not being answered at all. So we have to be very careful. All right, so a person saying, I supplicated again and again, and I do not think my prayer will be answered. Then he becomes frustrated, in such circumstances and gives up supplication altogether. All right, so dua is answered as long as you avoid these two. Make sure you avoid these two things. لا يزال يستجاب للعبد ما لم يدعو بإثم أو قطيعة رحم ما لم يستعجل. قيل يا رسول الله ما الاستعجال؟ قال يقول قد دعوت وقد دعوت فلم أرى يستجاب لي. All right, so a person says that I've made dua, I've done all this dua, I keep making dua, it's not being answered. All right, this is hastiness in dua, and this is something that has been prohibited, and this is a means or a grounds for the dua not being accepted. It has been mentioned that between the dua of Zakaria, asking for a child, all right, Zakaria, he made this dua, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ, that he made a dua for Allah to give him a child. It's been said that between the dua of Zakaria asking for a child and the dua being answered was a period of 40 years. 40 years where he made this dua. And we can assume that he was not just making it one time, but he was something he was constantly doing. And it took 40 years between when he first made this dua and when it finally was answered. It's also been said that between the dua of Musa against Fir'aun and the dua being answered was a period of 40 years. So you might have to wait a long time. All right, but the minute you start to say that the dua is not going to be answered, I made dua, it hasn't been answered, then this is where now you are potentially making your dua rejected. So we have to exercise patience. When it comes to dua, we have to exercise patience. Allah will answer, but on His terms, on His timing. And we make the dua, but we don't decide when it will be answered. Allah will decide when it will be answered. And if you become frustrated, then this may cause your dua not to be answered if you show this type of frustration and lack of patience. Yeah. How do you prevent yourself from becoming frustrated? Well, you look at what we just mentioned here, right? Stories of the pious people of the past. They made dua, it was not answered right away. All right? So it comes with having proper belief, all right, and having patience, all right, but also knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer when He decides it's best to answer. And we look at the examples of the people of the past, even the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? He was making dua for victory and so on, and he endured suffering for a number of years before the victory finally came. So you look at the examples of the righteous people of the past to see that they were patient, and then we have to be patient as well. Good. So it's asking about, you asked Allah for something specific, and it did not come out the way you wanted it to. So it's natural that you might get frustrated. But this comes down to something we'll mention next week, inshallah, which is that how Allah answers dua is not necessarily what you exactly ask for. All right. When we say Allah answers dua, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get exactly how you ask for it. All right. Like when you go to the restaurant and you order a meal, and then you tell them no onions. It comes with onions. You get upset. This is not how dua works, right? Where you expect that whatever you ordered you're gonna get. That's not how it is. Right? So what you ask Allah for, it's not necessarily that when He answers it, He will give you exactly what you asked for. So this comes back to when we say Allah answers dua, what does it actually mean? Does it mean that you get exactly what you want when you want it? No. That's not what we mean when we say Allah answers the dua. And we'll talk about that inshallah next week. So it also comes down to knowing how Allah answers supplication. All right, the next thing is transgression in dua. Al-i'tida fi dua. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, "Ud'u rabbakum tadarru'an wa khufya innahu la yuhibbul mu'tadin." Call upon Allah, your Lord in humility and privately. Indeed, He does not like transgressors. And we have mentioned some examples of transgression in dua before. What has been mentioned, such as forcing the dua to rhyme, excessive rhyming, raising the voice, calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a very loud voice, asking for what is not appropriate, being too detailed. We've gone over some of these before when we covered the section on the etiquettes of dua. Imam al-Khattabi says transgression in dua does not mean making too much dua. right? So what it does not mean is making too much dua. This is recommended. It's recommended to make as much dua as possible. Because it's been narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah loves those who are persistent in dua. And he said also, when any one of you makes dua, let him do it much, for he is asking his Lord. So when we say transgression, it doesn't mean a person is, there's no such thing as making too much dua. Right? There's no such thing as making too much dua. It is recommended to increase in dua and make it as much as possible. But what's meant by transgression is these things that we have mentioned here. Right? Asking for things that are not appropriate, asking for things that are impossible, being too detailed, raising the voice, focusing too much on the wording. Right? These are examples of transgression in dua. Number 4, things that we have been prohibited doing when making dua, cursing the wind. Right? Cursing the wind. Narrated in hadith that a man cursed the wind. And the narrator, Muslim's version has, the wind snatched away a man's cloak. Right? So a strong wind came, snatched away his cloak during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and he cursed it. Right? He invoked Allah's curse on the wind. So the Prophet said, do not curse it, for it is under command. It is under Allah's command. And if anyone curses a thing undeservedly, the curse returns upon him. All right, so be careful about cursing things that are just fulfilling Allah's commands. The wind, as other hadith mentioned, that the wind is from rawhillah, it is from Allah's mercy. And it could also be from His punishment. But it is obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is just doing what it is commanded to do. And so a person should not curse the wind, revile the wind, abuse the wind, because this indirectly, a person is there indirectly complaining about Allah, because Allah is the one who set that wind. All right, so we have to be very careful when it comes to things like this. The hadith mentions أن رجلا لعن الريح وقال مسلم وهو ابن أبي قريم إن رجلا نازعته الريح رداءه على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تلعنها فإنها مأمورة وإنه من لعن شيئا ليس بأهل رجعت اللعنة عليه. Right, if a person curses something that does not deserve to be cursed, then that curse will return back on him. Yeah. Right. So the question is, does it only apply to the wind, or anything? Is it more general? All right. So obviously the context of the hadith was about the wind. Well, we could extend it, inshallah, to anything that is any type of weather, anything that's following Allah's commands, because as we know, there's no such thing as Mother Nature, right? The wind or the rain, it doesn't come whenever it wants, right? It comes by Allah's command. So what do we do if there is a wind that's causing problems, right? What do we do? You should not curse it, but you should ask Allah for the good of it, right? And seek refuge from the evil of it, right? So don't curse it. Don't speak ill about the wind. But if there is this wind is bringing destruction, what do you do instead? You ask Allah for protection from it, right? Without cursing it, but you ask Allah's protection. As it comes in this hadith, wind is the mercy of Allah. It brings mercy or punishment, so do not denounce it, but ask Allah the Exalted for the good of it, and seek the protection of Allah from its evil. All right. لا تسبوا الريح فإن رأيتم ما تكرهون فقولوا. And the rest of the hadith mentioned that ask Allah for the good of it and seek protection. Say, اللهم إني أسألك خيرها وخير ما أرسلت به وأعوذ بك من شرها وشر ما فيها وشر ما أرسلت به. I seek refuge. Or first, if it's good, the wind is bringing blessings and bounty, then say, Allah, I ask you the good of it and the good in which it has been sent with, and I seek refuge in the evil of it and the evil in which it has been sent with. So we avoid cursing the wind directly, but if it is bringing harm, then we can and we should seek Allah's protection from the destruction that it may bring. All right, along those lines, also the fever. Right, and this is what we mentioned earlier, which is it's not just the wind, it's anything that Allah has decreed. Right, anything that Allah has decreed that it's not acting on its own, it's coming from Allah's decree. So this applies to things like the fever as well. Rasulullah visited Sa'ib or Musayyib, and he asked her, "What ails you?" She said, "He said, you're shivering." She said that it is a fever. May Allah not bless it. All right. So she said the fever, and may Allah not bless it. La barakallahu fiha. Right. May Allah not bless it. So then he said to her afterwards, "Do not revile fever." Why? Because it cleanses out sins. It cleanses out the sins of the sons of Adam in the same way that a furnace removes the dirt of iron. Right? These things, you look at it as bad, but actually it's good. It's cleansing you of sins. So there is benefit in it. So do not curse the fever. All right, next thing is do not make dua to shame somebody. All right, making dua to shame somebody. So there was a man during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a drunkard. He was a companion, but he was also a drunkard. And this is not just a one-time thing. He was a person who was constantly drinking, to the point where he received the punishment of drinking. So a man who drank wine was brought to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ ordered that he be given the punishment for drinking, which is being lashed. So the Prophet ﷺ said, beat him, and Abu Hurairah added, some of us beat him with our hands, and some with their shoes, and some with their garments, by twisting it like a lash. Right? So everybody just coming down on this guy. And this is okay because the Prophet ﷺ ordered them to do this. But when they did something that he did not order them to do, then he corrected it. And then when we finished, someone said to him, may Allah disgrace you. May Allah disgrace you. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard that, then he said, do not say that. Do not say so, for you are helping shaitan to overpower him. All right, so a person made dua against him. He said, akhzaqullah, may Allah disgrace you. And the Prophet said, do not say that, because you are helping shaitan to overpower him. Now, how is this helping shaitan to overpower him? Rasulullah says that if you say, may Allah disgrace you, if you make this dua against your brother or sister, that you are helping shaitan to overpower him. How is that the case? Okay. Anything else? Okay. When the shaitan is tempting this person, what does he want? Right, the shaitan wants to disgrace you. Right, when the shaitan is coming to this person and beautifying the sin of alcohol, he wants to disgrace that person. So when you say, may Allah disgrace you, what you're doing is you're basically allowing shaitan to reach his goal. The shaitan wants him to be disgraced. So if you say, may Allah disgrace you, then you are essentially letting the shaitan win and fulfill his goal. Right, this is what Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar says. The meaning of helping shaitan to overpower him is that the shaitan aims, by beautifying the sin, to cause the person to be disgraced. That's what the shaitan wants. The shaitan wants that person to be disgraced. So when one makes dua for that person to be disgraced, it is as if they have fulfilled the aim of shaitan. Right? You fulfill the aim of shaitan by saying that, making that dua against that person. So Rasulullah says, لا تقولوا هذا لا تعينوا عليه الشيطان. Don't say that. Don't help the shaitan to overpower that person. In another narration, in the same hadith, the people, after they had beat him, they started to, shame him. But when some of the people said, oh, Allah put you to shame, he told them not to say that and help the devil to get power over him, but to say instead, oh Allah forgive him, oh Allah show mercy to him. So Rasulullah taught them that you should not, don't curse him, do not revile him, do not ask Allah to shame him, but rather ask Allah to forgive him and ask Allah to have mercy on him. Because we don't want the shaitan to achieve his goal. The shaitan wants that person to be disgraced. And if you make dua for him to be disgraced, then you have completed the aim of the shaitan. وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا اللَّهُمَّ اغْفِرْ لَهُ اللَّهُمَّ ارْحَمْهُ. We should say instead, if somebody is doing something wrong, right, don't say that, may Allah disgrace you for doing this. Right, this is something common, especially when you might be advising somebody and they're not listening to your advice. Then you make dua against them, may Allah, do this to you, or may Allah shame you and these kind of things. These things should not be said. Right? If a person is persistent in sin, then make dua for them. And don't let the shaitan overpower that person. All right, number 7, we'll try to wrap up here, maybe the last one for today. Do not ask for punishment in this life. All right, another thing that we prohibited from doing in dua is asking for punishment. Hadith of Anas ibn Malik narrated that the Prophet ﷺ visited a man who was so emaciated that he had become like a baby bird. He was so sick that he was like a baby bird. He became so weak and feeble that he was like a bird, a baby bird. So the Prophet said to him, and did you not used to supplicate? Did you not used to ask your Lord for sound health? And the man said, I used to say, oh Allah, whatever you're going to punish me with in the hereafter, then hasten it for me in this world. Right? He kind of be using a logical way of thinking. Right? Oh Allah, if you're going to punish me in the hereafter, then let me take the punishment now so that I can be safe from it in the hereafter. But Rasulullah says that no, don't ask for any punishment, not in this life or in the hereafter. Don't ask for any punishment. All right? A person might think that I want to be safe from punishment in the hereafter because I can't handle the punishment in the hereafter, but I can handle the punishment in the dunya, so let it come to me here. No. Rasulullah says, do not ask Allah to punish you. So the Prophet said, glory is to Allah, you are not capable of that, or you are not able to stand that. Rather, you should say, oh Allah, give us good in this world and good in the hereafter, and spare us from the punishment of the fire. All right? So don't ever ask for punishment in this life. Rather, you should say, Allahumma atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhab an-nar. Right? This is one of the most common du'as of Rasulullah. And it said that, hadith of Anas, the most frequent invocation of the Prophet was to say, oh Allah, give to us in the world that which is good, and in the hereafter that which is good, and save us from the torment of the fire. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. So we don't want punishment, not in this life, not in the hereafter. So don't ever ask Allah for punishment in this life, and definitely, of course, not in the hereafter either. What is meant by good in, and so the narration mentions that whenever Anas would supplicate, Anas ibn Malik, the companion, whenever he made dua, he would always say this dua with it. Any dua he's making for anything, he would always include this dua. Whenever he would call upon Allah, he would always make this dua. So this is one of the duas that any dua you make should include this dua. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Give us the good in this life and the good in the next life, and save us from the punishment of the hellfire. And it's a comprehensive dua that includes everything. Good in this life, everything that's good in the next life. But what is specifically meant by good in this world? Scholars have mentioned that it is the worship of Allah, to be granted the worship of Allah and well-being. Right? When we want Allah to grant us the good in this life, we're specifically being able to worship Allah, and having well-being, right, in health and strength and so on. And good in the next life is paradise and forgiveness. Paradise and forgiveness. All right, so I think we'll stop here for today. So we have a few more to finish off for what has been prohibited, and then we'll wrap up the series with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers dua and some of the signs of dua that has been accepted. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Sisters, any questions? Brothers, any questions? All right, so we'll conclude for today. Sallallahu wasallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.